can probably see, I am the only one out on the lake today, which is a little bit of a rarity, but it is about a week and a half into March. So this is pretty much last ice that we're going to be seeing for the season. And one of the big things when you get to this point of the season, or again really early in the season, is ice safety always. So you see I got my picks on. You know, these are floating bibs. I got my floating jacket if I get a little bit more concerned. But you know, the other piece of this is, you know, a spud bar. And for 30-40 bucks, this is one of the things that'll probably keep you the safest out on the ice. And what you're seeing me doing here is, you know, as I see what looks like wet spots in the ice, spots where there's cracking in it, anywhere where it looks like there's a discoloration of the ice, I'm checking that as I'm kind of going along. And I'm checking my path, and then I'm bringing my stuff with it. And so I can pretty confidently say there's about 10 inches of ice. There's actually a couple muskrat holes out on this ice, and sticking the spud bar down, there's about 12 to 15 inches of ice still sticking around. So we're safe, but with the way the weather is, you know, the way the sun hits it, you never know, and that can change on a daily basis. And so you don't want to assume one place has 15 inches of ice that the whole lake has 15 inches of ice. So that's why you're seeing me kind of continuing to check, continuing to do these pieces just from a safety state, just to make sure that you know, you're not going to have any wet days here out on the ice. So, all right, hooked up. Got something pretty decent on. I know we got some windy conditions here, but we're out fishing for some bluegill today, jigging late ice and taking advantage of some last final days of the ice as they're out with here. We got a really finicky bite today, and it's a great time to talk about what type of techniques to use. And the fish just aren't biting the way that you want them to bite. You know, today we're just using a smaller jig. It's probably about a 2 or a 3 millimeter gold tungsten jig. Allows that weight to go down there. But we're using spikes tipped with a little tail. This is a BY bait that's on here. And I've been changing out the colors to kind of see what's working. We're chasing after some big gills today. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks and you know, some easy ways to tackle these if you're just starting out ice fishing and don't quite know it. Let's get this guy back. One of the other things that I found to be really successful when I'm fishing bluegills is your jigging rhythm. Every guy is going to say they have their own kind of rhythm, how they go about it. But one of the things that I really like to do is I will kind of vary up the actual aggressiveness of my jigging. So I might give it a few slightly aggressive jigs here. But one of the things I like to do is jig and then completely hold still and almost kind of dead stick it. And I'll let that sit for 10-15 seconds, and believe it or not, a lot of times you'll find bluegill hit in that 10 to 15 seconds, but that rod is completely stationary. Now, depends on the day. Some days you might have to jig entirely and absolutely, you know, keep that jig moving in the water. But I found more often than not, jigging, even moving it up and taking that jig up and then letting it stop allows that bluegill to track it up, sit and look at it, and gain enough confidence to bite it. So if you haven't really perfected your own jigging technique, feel free to steal mine. Been really successful for me across my seasons of bluegill fishing. One of the other things you'll see, you know, if you don't have a sonar Vexar unit and you're kind of chasing after panfish, you know, my other suggestion is make sure you're jigging, but also have something like an automatic fisherman or a tip up while you're doing this. Real reason for that is, you know, if you don't have a sonar, you don't have those electronics, a big part of this is going to be starting to target where those fish are. And if I've got a couple tip-ups, if I've got a couple automatic fishermen, I can start to set those up in different areas or potentially different depths from what I'm jigging in. And if you start to see that, you know, your tip-ups, your automatic fishermen are being really successful in an area, it's a pretty good key to say, well, maybe that's where you should start your jigging and start moving to that area as well. Oh, we got a fish. You can see that rod bending here. Look at that. Big old fat perch. This just goes to show you how important having an extra line with some live bait out can be. We've had a really tough bite here as far as, you know, the bluegill go. They're looking at the bait, you know, nosing it, real light bites. But these perch are targeting these crappie minnows, getting pretty aggressive around it. And, you know, normally it would be good eating, but we're going to throw them back today. Again, you know, when we talk a little bit about what we're using here, nothing crazy as far as the setup for our automatic fisherman. We've got about a size, probably 4 here, maybe a little bit too big. Got to maybe a size 6, and putting a couple pieces of split shot. I got them about 8 inches up, and seems to have worked out this time around. So let's get it re-rigged here and hopefully get another one as we put it back down in the hole. Well, unfortunately, this guy came off camera here, but this shows the importance of those automatic fishermen. Nice little about 8-inch perch here that I got on the automatic fisherman here, and again, just shows why those 3 rods are always a great part. You know, I'm jigging here with spikes, and I've got some crappie minnows sitting right behind me that get me on some perch as well too. So let's keep seeing if we can't get some more on the end of our line here. So I think one of the kind of common first things that a lot of people buy when they look at ice fishing electronics or technology, it's probably going to be some type of sonar or flasher, like a Vexilar or Markham, you know, or even Lowrance makes, you know, any type of model of it. And I think a lot of times people think that might be technology you just have to go ice fishing, right? You see so many people out on the ice with them. And while it gives you a tremendous advantage, and I will never say it doesn't mean that you have to. You shouldn't shy away from your first season of ice fishing just because you can't throw down the $250 or $300 to get into kind of your baseline flashers. If you don't have one, you know, there's kind of an easy way you can look at pan fishing and still be very effective even without having the flasher. Right? Once you kind of know or have a general idea of where those fish are, what you're just going to do is take your jig and your line, and you're just going to open your bail, and you're going to let that jig fall all the way to the bottom of the lake or river, wherever you're fishing at. And you'll see that my spool is turning here, and I'm going to keep letting it go until I see slack in the line happen, or I see my spool actually stop. And so you'll see I'm still pulling line out, waiting to hit that bottom, and now my spool has just stopped. I know that I'm actually on the bottom. So now I can reel up to this, and I know I'm on bottom. And just like when you're thinking about fishing live bait, most of the time with panfish, if you're fishing bluegill especially, but even perch or crappie, a lot of times they're going to stick around to that, you know, right off bottom to about 5 foot up. And without a flasher, you can do the same thing. If I know I'm on bottom here, I can just start jigging, and I know I've moved my rod about a foot up in the water column. And now I can sit here and jig, and while I may not know a fish is immediately on it, I'm going to jig as if there is, right? And I'm going to assume there's something around it, and I'm going to watch that strike indicator very intently to see if I've got a bite or anything happening on it. And if I don't see success at this depth, well, I can easily just reel up another foot, and now I'm in that 2 foot above bottom water column. And now I'm going to fish that and see if anything is in that area with it. Or, you know, I can jig and slowly take my rod up to do the same thing. And if I don't find anything, again, drop it back down. But I can just as efficiently without a flasher fish that 1 foot, you know, off of bottom to that 4 or 5 foot off of bottom column and still pull those fish up. So while it's a great tool, not a necessity, not a reason to keep you off the ice and going out for your first time ice fishing. So let's see if we can get this to work and get some bluegill here without a flasher on the ice. All right, we got one. Not quite the monster we are looking for here, but again, just goes to show that even without a Vexilar, even without a flasher, doesn't mean you still can't target those bluegill with it. again, really simple. I dropped it down about a foot, and from there, I was just jigging it, taking it up a few inches at a time, just kind of seeing what's out there. Saw an initial little bite, held it dead still, saw him commit a little bit more, and we got him up above the ice. All right, let's get him back. Now, same thing before as I was talking. If I'm not having success doing this in one hole, I'm gonna spend 10 or 15 minutes. I'm gonna move on to the next hole. And same thing, drop it to bottom, slowly work my way up. I know I'm about a foot up. I might reel up another foot. I'm gonna keep jigging. Once I've gotten through that kind of 1 to 4 foot range, or maybe 1 to 5 foot range, I haven't had any bites, maybe the fish aren't really keying in. I'm gonna move to that next hole. And especially with pan fishing, that idea of hole hopping is really gonna be the difference of what can put you on fish, and also turn what can be a pretty lackluster day of just staring at a hole hoping there's fish below it into increasing your chances of actually hooking up on something. Oh, well, that can happen. You saw the size of the bluegill I had before, probably a little small one. Saw the bite indicator, kind of tap, tap, tap. And in those instances, you kind of commit, and you're going to miss some fish, but now I know that I'm probably at the right depth where I'm going to continue to get bites. So I'm going to key back in on this, do a little bit of jigging, see if I can't get that fish. And there he is. So a little bit of patience, keeping that depth the same. I have my second bluegill in just a short span of time. Again, no flasher. I don't necessarily need it. I've just worked it off the bottom, and I started about 6 inches, about 1.5 feet where I was at right there. And again, if you get one bite, even if you miss it, bring it back down slowly, jig in that same area, and hopefully you should get that fish back committing again. One of the other things that's good to do once you actually get a fish on there, you'll see how now my jig is actually completely vertical here. Just with the way of hooking them, my knots moved. And that's not great. When I actually go to jig this in the water, it's not a whole lot of movement. All you need to do, take your line, move that over so that that's now going to sit in a horizontal position. And now you're going to get way more action out of the grub, the plastic, way more likely to hook up. Sounds like such a simple thing, but just making sure that you've got your jigs horizontal is going to catch you so many more fish by the end of the day than if you're just sitting, not checking it, and jigging vertically on the pole. So let's talk a little bit about gear we're using today. So rod you've been seeing me use is going to be one of the St. Croix Legend series. I think it's the Mojo Ice is one of them on there, but Legend Silver, this is going to be their 24 ultralight. One of the things I really like about this rod, and it becomes really crucial when you talk about pan fishing, is going to be the spring bobber. It's actually built into the rod itself. Now, it's a little bit more premier rod. You're going to probably spend 40, 50 bucks on this rod if I remember correctly. But I really like having that integrated spring bobber. And when you talk about pan fishing, it's going to be really difficult for you to catch any type of fish without some type of efficient spring bobber. Now, you can pick up spring bobbers to add to just about any rod. And that's going to be one of the first things you're going to want to do because this is going to be really how you detect a bite. A lot of times panfish, especially in the winter, are going to have such a light bite that without a strike indicator, you almost wouldn't even know that they're actually biting your jig unless you had something like this. So, rods, you can use just about any size you want. I really like the ultralights. I want to have something that is really sensitive overall. But your strike indicator, honestly, is the most important part of the outfit. You can have any rod. I've seen people use heavy rods and literally have some of the best strike indicators out there, and they'll outfish somebody that has a 27-inch or 28-inch ultralight rod just because of the fact that the strike indicator is so good. So don't let the rods fool you here. The most important part when you're bluegill fishing is always going to be that strike indicator. Today we're using a Acme. I believe this is a 4mm jig that we're going to use. I've been trading them off today anywhere from 2 down to 4, or 2 to 4 over to 6. The other thing that I've got on here, I think one of the best reels, honestly, that's out for ice fishing market is going to be one of the Eagle Claw inline reels. This reel is going to cost you about $30, and I honestly think it's one of the best ice fishing reels out there. I've used inline reels that cost 3 times the price of this, and I've had tons of issue with them, to be honest with you. This thing's a champ. It's a workhorse. I've had it for 4 or 5 seasons now with absolutely zero issues, and continue to have no issues with it. So if you're looking for a really great ice fishing rod, these Eagle Claws, $30, you're getting a ton of bang for your buck with it there. As far as the line goes, the only thing with the Eagle Claws, you're going to want to put some type of backing on here. I use the same 20-pound Dacron backing that I use for my fly reels on here, and I've got that wrapped around, and then I follow that and tie it to about 2-pound test. Generally, if you're pan fishing, I'm not going to suggest you use really anything more than probably 2 or 3 pounds. Reason being is fish can see heavier pound test line. And it's a really common mistake when people first start fishing is you think, I want my heaviest line. I want to make sure they don't break off. If you're catching 2-pound bluegill, you're probably looking at state record territory. So you don't need a real heavy line to pull these fish up, right? A rod that can load really well and a drag system that works well allows you to pull in some really big fish. I mean, you saw me pulling that bigger bluegill earlier today. But that 2-pound, because it is much thinner, can be harder to detect underneath the ice and in the water. And that just means that those finicky fish much more likely to bite when you've got 2-pound test on versus when you've got 6, 7, or 8-pound test on. So make sure you lighten that up. Use some really light line when you're looking at picking out those ice fishing rods for bluegill. So again, strike indicator, light line, ultralight rod, pretty easy setup, and that's what we're using today to catch these fish. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a jumbo perch. I've probably been showing you here this fish playing around with my automatic fisherman. Well, this is exactly what you're looking for when you set up some live bait out on the ice, and not a better looking specimen for the winter jumbo perch. This guy is put on the winter pounds and probably about that 12-inch size. And, what you probably saw was, just how finicky he was and how I had to kind of dial in my automatic fisherman to really get him to bite. Pretty much the second I dropped a minnow down, he was all over it. And what I found was I was just having minnows getting ripped off of hooks over and over and over again. And what I ended up doing was adjusting the trigger mechanism on my automatic fisherman to give more resistance. And what it allowed is when he finally did bite, it allowed for more line to go out before the mechanism actually triggered because he was biting so hard, and allowed that hook to actually get inside rather than him just biting the minnow, and finally ended up hooking him. So great specimen here. Absolutely what I love coming out in the ice and catching during the winter time frame. Nothing better than a big old fat bellied jumbo perch. So really great conclusion to the day, and it just goes to show that a little bit of dialing in, changing those details around, and just kind of making sure that you're thinking through each of the pieces as to why it's happening can lead to a trophy fish up on the ice. So let's work on getting him back and have him swim another day. So, what you just saw there is a little bit of what I talked about, kind of that hole hopping, right? You saw me catch one fish right in the beginning there, and checked pretty much every other hole in the area, just to kind of see what I was finding as far as fish go. Again, it just goes to show that that hole hopping is really crucial. I started to explore, check some other ones, came back to the hole I was productive out of, and turns out there was still some more fish in there. Gave him a little bit of time, to get away from me jigging, and probably brought the bite back on in that hole. So a little bit of an example of how to go about doing that hole hopping if you've got a few holes drilled. Well, I think great way to end the day here, and goes to show you that that kind of multi-pronged approach is absolutely the way to go. You saw me jigging, and while I was jigging, I got two different automatic fishermen set up, and you see the success of just having that one extra line in the water with some type of live bait to really target a different set of species. So hopefully you get a little bit better idea off of this. Again, you don't need a ton of fancy hardware. If you just used exactly what I did today, you've got about $50 in a bluegill panfish rod. You got about $40 in an automatic fisherman, maybe another $40 that you got for a rod and everything set up with it. So again, for about that $100 range to $120, you can do exactly what I did out on the ice today. So hopefully you learned a few of those tips and tricks and some easy things to get you on a few more fish this ice fishing season. So as always, if there's more things or questions you've got, feel free to reach out to me. I always want to make sure I tailor the content in a learning fashion for what people want to learn and what tips and tricks they want to see. But great day out on the ice, and hopefully you learned something from watching some of the fish today. Good day, and we'll see you next time.